Hello there Reason people and hello Voltage Modular people. PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And today we're going to be looking at Voltage Modular inside of Reason. Well, really what we're going to be looking at is all the I/O, how we can get audio in and out and how we can get CV data in and out. And we'd have a chat about MIDI and really about how the two systems kind of work together. And they do work really well together. I'll also probably do another video where we'll be using Reason inside of Voltage Modular because it can run as a VST inside that. So I think let's start actually at the very top. Voltage Modular, what makes it slightly a little bit special, we'll say over Reason, is internally it runs at 48K and the CV rate is also 48K. So it doesn't matter if you switch your audio and CV cables around. In fact, they're the same cable, whereas in Reason we have separate cables for audio and CV because the CV rate in Reason is, yeah, it's incredibly slow. In fact, it's your it'd be your sample rate divided by your buffer size. So if you was running at 48K and you had a buffer size of say 64, that means you're going to get around about 750, samples per second compared to 48,000. But don't see that as a limitation within Reason. Yes, it is a limitation. However, when we look at Voltage Modular, or when I look at Voltage Modular, I think of Voltage Modular as modules, and modules I think of as good old modular systems, end of story. Yes, when we talk about, we're in Reason, we talk about modules in Reason, I think of a studio and studio racks. So I think of it that kind of modular level, which is obviously different from Voltage Modular. Now, the big advantage of only having that amount of samples per second is we can really scale up Reason. We can run a lot of stuff because we're not running, it's not having to process that amount of data. Whereas in Voltage Modular, I have topped it out. Yes, I am running quite heavy projects, but it is very efficient at the same time. It's just that you can scale one, but then with this one, you can have some lovely sweeps. You can do some lovely sound designs. And that's what I love about Voltage Modular. And so these two systems together, I personally think they work really well because of that. The audio rate of Reason, by the way, it obviously comes down to your audio card. So that can be typically from 44.1 up to 192. As I just said, this runs internally at 4800. So it makes sense to run Reason at the same rate as Voltage Modular. So you're not upsampling or downsampling your audio when you're converting from one to the other. So I prefer to run Reason in 48K, and I try and run it with 64 buffers as well. Let's have a look at the I/O from Reason to Voltage Modular. Getting stuff from Reason into Voltage Modular is very straightforward. Going the other way around, it is quite straightforward, but sometimes it's not quite as obvious. Let's start off with something like the transport bar. When I hit play in Reason, that's going to send a 5-volt trigger out of this socket, and it's going to make the play gate high. So that's going to stay a constant 5 volts. When I hit stop, we're going to get a stop trigger, and obviously changing the BPM will actually change the sync rate. And this sync rate is a 96 ppqn, which is pulse per quarter note. So that's what comes out then, and obviously there's some sync tools within Voltage Modular we can use to sync things up, so we can keep everything, say, aligned between Reason and Voltage Modular. Okay, over this side, and in fact I'm going to flip round to the back of the rack, and you can see the corresponding outputs. So here we go, 1 and 2 would be 1 and 2 here. This is going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 in Reason, 7 and 8. So that's our outputs. We've also got some inputs here. So the inputs will relate to, obviously, again, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now we think of these as like audio sources, and we think of these as audio cables, but just like a cable where we can take a cable, say, and wire it between our amp and speakers and we can hear music, fantastic. We can take that same piece of wire and wire it between our PC and our printer, and we can print a Word document. Same here. There's nothing stopping us sending CV signals, note and gate signals out via the audios and in via the audios, and this is one method I use quite a bit to talk to Reason, and Reason back to Voltage Modular. Before we get in a bit more detail about that, let's just quickly touch on the CV sources over here. It doesn't matter if we're using the sequencer in Reason, if we've got player devices above voltage modular, if the voltage modular is in a combinator, if we've got the keyboard connected directly, i.e. we've got MIDI focus into it, if we're using gate and note CV into it, whichever one you're using, it's going to come out of all three of these sources. Of course, there's a big difference is if I'm playing a chord, we're only going to get a single pitch coming out of here, a bit like, you know, gate and CV within Reason. Obviously, if I'm playing a chord, we're going to get the poly pitch coming out, and we do have a poly mode in Reason, but the poly mode in Reason is totally different and the way it works from the poly mode in voltage modular. In Reason, it works a bit more, I think, like a MIDI mode, whereas in voltage modular, it's actually, think of this, so this is number of voices 8, think of it as 8 pieces of wire, so it's 8 of these together, just strung into one cable. And then obviously we've got MIDI, and MIDI is a funny sort of concept because Reason doesn't really have the true concept of what we know as MIDI. And this is how we can very, very easily get data from Reason into voltage modular, and is my preferred method of getting note and gate data from, as I said, Reason into voltage modular. Now, getting stuff back out and back into Reason is a different kettle of fish, and we're going to have a look at a few different options. We can use the MIDI output in voltage modular to get obviously MIDI data back into Reason, but we do have to use a loop back. So something like loop MIDI might work. That's the one I actually prefer to use, and as you can see, I've got this loop MIDI port already set up there. So all I do in voltage modular is come into here and select the loop MIDI port. So that's now talking to that. Obviously, I'll have this connected from, say, whatever devices I've got running in voltage modular. And then in Reason, all I've got to do is, hang on, let me go and grab my preferences. There we go. And I've got myself a controller set up here. And obviously that will be pointing to that loop MIDI port. And then all I need to do is surface lock this to an instrument or something. And so we can play that directly. It might sound a little bit like a flap. It's actually very, very easy to set up, very, very quick setup, because once you've got loop MIDI set up, you can do all kinds of wonderful things with it. But that's just one simple way using the simple MIDI port out. And of course, as well as going out, there is an equivalent of a MIDI port in. And what we do is we select ourselves a MIDI port. So if we come up here, I've got one here, loopback called voltage. So I'll call that one called voltage. And then obviously the EMI or the MIDI out device, we set that to obviously the same MIDI port, which happens to be voltage as well. So now I can talk out of this, talk in particular MIDI channels, and obviously get my MIDI data in different ways coming into voltage modular. And again, this is a kind of preferred way I actually do like to do things. Now, what we're going to look at now is a way we can actually get our note and gate data, say, out of the auxiliary out, so we don't have to worry about any kind of loopbacks. Again, this is a method I use quite a bit when I'm dealing with just, you know, sort of mono sort of pitch and gate data. This is a preferred method rather than having to set up loads of MIDI ports. So let's have a quick look at that, how that would actually wire up and how that would look. Sending CV data out of voltage modular into Reason, it's very, very simple to do. The simple reason is voltage modular kind of works on a scale from -5 volts to +5 volts. Obviously, it can go totally outside of that range as well. And Reason works on a scale from -1 volt to +1 volt. And again, that can totally go out of that scale. But they are scaled together. So if I was to send out 2.5 volts out of one of these signals, out of one of these ports, in Reason, it'll actually read as half a volt. So it works brilliantly. So 5 volts will come out as a volt, as I say. If I send out a single volt out of here, 1 volt, it will come out as 0.2 of a volt in Reason. So the conversion's done really, really nicely for us. However, sending CV pitch data out of voltage modular, or even from Reason, if we're sending it directly via the audios and back into voltage modular, is a different kettle of fish altogether. For the simple reason is because voltage modular uses a 1 volt per octave scale, and in Reason we've got a 1 volt for the complete range. that's what we use. It's 1 volt for the complete range. So we have to really do scaling and conversions, and I happen to have written a little simple module to do that for us. So what I've got here is I've got my storing forwards, it's a new module which I've got coming out, and that's just going through the scales at the moment. I'm converting that into audio, which is then obviously coming into Reason. So if we could just close this down and pop into Reason itself. I've decided to take the gate and put it directly back in. Obviously this gate data can go off somewhere totally different within Reason. I'm actually taking the pitch data, converting it over into CV. From there, I'm going into this analyzer here. So on this analyzer, we can actually see it actually playing through the scales perfectly how it should be. And then from that CV out, we're now converting it back into audio just to prove that we can then take obviously our pitch data, wherever it's coming from, and push it back into Voltage Modular itself. So let's just open that back up again. And that's where this is coming in here. Again, we got to convert it from Reason into Voltage Modular, which I'm doing. And then I've got this CV note here playing, and as you can see now, we can see it going through and it's playing all the notes correctly. And this is just showing you the gate, which is coming out, just a 5 volt gate. So as I say, in Reason, that gate, if we wire it up to an analyzer, maybe we should do that, you can see it will actually come out as a 1 volt. And that is one simple way that we can get data in and out. You know, and there's nothing stopping me having something like a Hammond mod panel within Reason, and I can put players on top of that, and then I can take that data and input it this way as well. So this is quite an interesting setup what we've got going on here. I've got my simple storing forward going on. Notice I've actually got the CV going directly out. Why? Because this actual device has a Reason button built into it, so when selected, it's actually going to convert the CV into the Reason note range. So we're sending it out and we're going to see what we're actually doing in Reason, because if you notice, there's no MIDI coming in, we've got none of this coming in, we've got no MIDI players. But if you actually notice, what I'm actually doing is I've got this attenuator and I've actually done automation on it. And so we just right click, do the automation. I've got gate and I've got CV here. So we just assign 1 to 1, you just assign it. And then obviously in Reason itself, there's a couple of different ways now we can actually get our CV data to control this automation for us. So let's just jump over into Reason and have a look at a couple of different ways we can do it in there. One simple way is actually obviously taking control of the input parameters here. So if we quickly whiz around to the back, you can see I'm actually going out, and this time I'm actually going into Thor. So I'm taking my audio into Thor, and in Thor itself, as some people may or may not know, you can actually convert the audio to CV using Thor. You don't actually have to use the robotic bean devices. You can use this if you wish. The big difference between this and robotic beans is you need 2 Thors to cover, say, 8 ports, because that's what the robotic beans ones do. They cover actually 8 ports. So we're going to use Thor here, and we're using that obviously to convert the MIDI to CV, and then we're just going back in via the CV modulation. There's nothing stopping us, say, taking this and putting this in, say, the combinator, and we can use a combinator. And in a combinator, as you can see over here, this is how I've got it set up. So CV1 coming in, and I'm pushing it out. So when we set automation, you don't get to see the friendly names within Reason. You still get to see just these numbers. So in Voltage Modular, that was saying I named that CV and I named that gate. So you just have to remember what you've set them to inside Reason. And obviously I can do it that way as well. So there's a number of different ways we could have done this and set this up to obviously get this to work. This just happens to be one way I decided to do it, as I say, and that's not using any other audio MIDI stuff. It's just using a bit of automation, something just a little bit different, something maybe to think about how you can obviously get some of these things working. So we've looked at a number of different ways we can get data in and out, and obviously the difference between their audio being 5 volts and Reason being 1 volt. At the beginning I showed use obviously of the MIDI out inside Voltage Modular. That is a method I use where I'd load up a VST within Voltage Modular and I can get the MIDI data out, so you can use things like captain chords, instant chord scale and all that, and talk that directly back into Reason. I say directly, obviously going back via a MIDI loopback. To me it's quite seamless the way it all works. And And in my next video, I'm probably going to look at, because we can run Reason as a VST with inside Voltage Modular. And so we'll actually have a look at that and have a look at all the different IOs and see if there's anything different using it that way round. Okay, so thank you for watching and bye for now.